The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension so thick you could practically slice it with a plasma cutter. Ambassador Vrex 9 adjusted his ceremonial robes for the 15th time in 10 minutes, his three eyes darting nervously between the assembled delegates. The Zephyrian representatives' gills fluttered anxiously, while the Corithian ambassador's scales had shifted from their usual blue to a sickly yellow-green that meant only one thing: absolute terror. "By the 7 moons of Altara," muttered Councillor Thys under her breath, her mandibles clicking in that particular way that indicated she was seriously reconsidering her career choices. "Why did we agree to this meeting?" The answer sat at the far end of the massive obsidian table, looking about as comfortable as a sand viper in a snowstorm. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's first and only representative to the Galactic Council, was methodically working her way through what appeared to be her 3rd cup of coffee. The humans had been granted membership only 6 months ago after their rather explosive introduction to galactic society. "She's doing it again," whispered Ambassador Kelton, his forearms twitching nervously. "That thing with the hot liquid. How does their biology even process that toxin?" "Be quiet," hissed Speaker Morvain, though his own voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to a dance. The ancient Voldorian had presided over the council for 3 centuries, and in all that time he'd never encountered a species quite like humans. They were unpredictable, illogical, and worst of all, they had this annoying habit of being right when everyone else was catastrophically wrong. The morning's agenda was supposed to be straightforward. The hegemony war had been raging for 2 standard years, with the Council losing ground to the Dominion forces on 17 different fronts. Traditional strategies had failed spectacularly, and morale was somewhere between non-existent and actively negative. Today they would vote on the final surrender terms. Dr. Vasquez took another sip of her coffee and glanced at her tablet. She'd been specifically instructed by the Earth government not to interfere with galactic politics unless directly asked. The Council had made it abundantly clear that humans were probationary members, essentially political tourists with fancy badges. "If we could begin," Speaker Morvain's voice boomed across the chamber, though it contained about as much authority as a deflated balloon. "Today we address the unfortunate reality of our position regarding the Dominion hegemony." The holographic display activated, showing star maps that looked like someone had spilled red paint all over them. Dominion-controlled systems spread across 3 galactic quadrants like a cosmic infection. "Our losses have been substantial," continued the speaker, his tentacles drooping in what any xenobiologist would recognize as the Voldorian equivalent of a deep sigh. "Fleet Admiral Zex reports that our remaining forces number fewer than 300 vessels across all theaters." A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. 300 ships against the Dominion's estimated 10,000. Even the most optimistic tactical computer would calculate their chances at approximately 0.0001%, with a margin of error that was probably more optimistic than the actual odds. Dr. Vasquez raised her hand. The entire chamber fell silent. Not the polite, attentive silence of a well-mannered assembly, but the dead, horrified silence of beings who had just realized their worst nightmare was about to unfold. "Yes?" Speaker Morvain managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have a question about your tactical assessments," Dr. Vasquez said, her tone as casual as someone asking about the weather. Ambassador Vrex 9 made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a prayer. The Corithian delegate had gone completely transparent, which in their species indicated either deep meditation or complete panic. Given the circumstances, panic seemed more likely. Dr. Vasquez, Speaker Morvain began carefully, as if addressing a potentially unstable explosive device. "While we appreciate your perspective, this is a matter of galactic security that requires—" "How many of your defeats involved direct frontal assaults on fortified positions?" She interrupted. The silence stretched on, and on, and on some more. Fleet Admiral Zex, a grizzled Nexarian whose scars told the story of 100 battles, cleared his throat. "The Dominion forces have superior technology and numbers. Standard military doctrine requires." That's not what I asked, Dr. Vasquez said, and took another sip of coffee. How many times did you try to punch through their front lines? Well, all of them, the Admiral admitted, his chitinous armor plates shifting in embarrassment. It's the accepted tactical approach for losing, apparently, Dr. Vasquez muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The insult hit the chamber like a photon torpedo to the hull. Several delegates gasped audibly, and Ambassador Theiss looked like she was about to faint. You simply didn't question military doctrine in the Galactic Council, especially not when that doctrine had been refined over millennia of warfare. Dr. Vasquez, Speaker Morvain's voice had taken on a warning tone that could have frozen helium. I must remind you that Earth's membership in this council is provisional. Perhaps it would be best if I shut up and let you surrender. Dr. Vasquez stood up, and somehow the human's modest height seemed to fill the entire chamber. How's that working out for you so far? Fleet Admiral Zex's mandibles clicked in what was either amusement or preparation for violence. It was hard to tell with Nexarians. And I suppose you have a better strategy, human. The way he said human made it sound like a particularly unpleasant disease. Dr. Vasquez smiled, and every alien in the room suddenly remembered why their species had developed instinctual fear responses. There was something deeply unsettling about human smiles, especially when they appeared in inappropriate situations. As a matter of fact, I do, she said, and activated her own holographic display. The star map that appeared was identical to the Council's version, but with several additional markers that made absolutely no sense to anyone present. What are those? Asked Ambassador Kelton, his curiosity overriding his terror. Supply lines, Dr. Vasquez replied. Fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles, food distribution centers, communication relays. You know, the boring stuff that keeps armies functioning. Speaker Morvain leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowing. Those targets are heavily defended. The casualties would be enormous. Would they? Dr. Vasquez zoomed in on a particular system. This depot supplies 17 Dominion fleets across 4 sectors. It's protected by exactly 12 patrol craft and a single orbital defense platform. Impossible, Fleet Admiral Zex snorted. No strategic asset would be so lightly defended, because nobody's ever been stupid enough to attack supply lines instead of battle fleets, Dr. Vasquez said. You've been playing checkers while they've been playing chess, and you're all so focused on taking their kings that you've forgotten about the board. The chamber erupted in debate. Half the delegates were arguing about the impossibility of such tactics, while the other half were frantically running calculations on their personal computers. The numbers that came back were interesting. Even if this intelligence is accurate, Ambassador Vrex 9 said, his voice shaking, the Council has never authorized asymmetric warfare. It violates the Accords of Galactic Warfare, Dr. Vasquez finished. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 16. All military engagements shall be conducted with honor and adherence to established tactical doctrine. I read it. She paused to take another sip of coffee, letting the silence build. Tell me, how many of those accords did the Dominion sign? Another silence. This one had a different quality to it, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air pressure drops and every living thing knows something significant is about to happen. None, admitted Speaker Morvain. The Dominion recognizes no authority beyond their own expansion. So you're following rules that your enemy ignores, using tactics they've already countered, and wondering why you're losing, Dr. Vasquez said. And your solution is to surrender. The logic was so simple, so obvious, that it was almost insulting. Almost. Fleet Admiral Zex was the first to break. The old warrior's scarred face split into what might have been a grin if Nexarians had been capable of such expressions. You're suggesting we abandon 3,000 years of military tradition. I'm suggesting you abandon 3,000 years of losing, Dr. Vasquez replied. But if you prefer tradition, I'm sure the Dominion will be happy to preserve your military customs in their museums. "This is madness," whispered Councillor Thys, though she was staring at the supply line data with fascination. Asymmetric warfare, hit-and-run tactics, targeting civilian infrastructure. Infrastructure, Dr. Vasquez corrected. Military infrastructure, and it's only madness if it doesn't work. She manipulated the holographic display, showing a complex web of supply routes and support systems. The Dominion expanded too fast, too far. Their lines are stretched across half the galaxy, and they're dependent on a handful of major supply hubs to keep their fleets operational. You take out those hubs, and their mighty armadas become very expensive space junk. Speaker Morvain was quiet for a long moment, his tentacles writhing in what anyone familiar with Valdorian body language would recognize as deep thought mixed with existential dread. "The casualties," he finally said. "If we target their supply infrastructure, civilian populations could be affected." "Could be," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "Or we could continue with frontal assaults and guarantee that every civilian in Council space becomes a casualty when the Dominion completes their conquest." The truth of that statement settled over the chamber like a shroud. The surrender terms they'd been preparing to vote on included provisions for population transfers, work camps, and the complete dissolution of member species governments. The Dominion's idea of mercy was allowing conquered populations to serve as slave labor. "How?" Fleet Admiral Zex asked suddenly. "Even if we accepted this strategy, our remaining forces lack the capability for coordinated strikes across multiple sectors." Dr. Vasquez smiled again, and this time several delegates actually flinched. "That's where it gets interesting," she said. "You've been thinking about this war like a traditional military engagement. Big fleets, big battles, winner takes all. But what if we treated it like something else?" "Such as?" Speaker Morvain prompted, though his voice suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. "It's an insurgency." The word fell into the chamber like a nuclear weapon. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in panic and outrage. "Guerrilla warfare?" "The Council doesn't engage in." "The Council is about to cease existing," Dr. Vasquez interrupted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a laser through tissue paper. "You can maintain your dignity while you're being processed for slave labor, or you can do whatever it takes to win." Fleet Admiral Zex leaned back in his chair, his cybernetic implants whirring as he processed tactical data. Small unit operations, fast strikes, minimal engagement. Hit their weak points and disappear before they can respond. "Exactly," Dr. Vasquez nodded, "and the beautiful thing about supply lines is that there are thousands of them. They can't guard everything." "But the ships," Ambassador Kelton protested. "We don't have enough vessels for simultaneous operations across multiple sectors. Who said anything about using ships?" Dr. Vasquez's grin was becoming positively predatory. "What do you mean?" Speaker Morvain asked, though his tone suggested he was afraid of the answer. "How do you think humans got to the stars in the first place?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "We didn't have faster-than-light communication, energy weapons, or artificial gravity. We had chemical rockets, nuclear warheads, and an absolutely unreasonable willingness to strap ourselves to explosive devices and launch into the void." The implications of that statement began to sink in. "You're talking about improvised weapons," Councillor Thys said slowly. "Suicide attacks." "I'm talking about making the cost of conquest higher than the benefits," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Every supply depot they lose costs them more than it cost us to destroy it. Every communication relay we take out forces them to reroute resources from their front lines to their rear areas." Fleet Admiral Zex was nodding slowly, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. Asymmetric resource expenditure, force multiplication through strategic targeting. "Now you're getting it," Dr. Vasquez said. "The Dominion has the biggest stick, but that doesn't matter if they can't lift it." "This is," Speaker Morvain paused, searching for words. "This is not how civilized species conduct warfare." "Civilized species are about to become extinct species," Dr. Vasquez replied. "The question is whether you want to die with honor or live without it." The chamber fell silent again. This time the quiet had a different quality. It was the silence of beings who were realizing that everything they thought they knew about warfare, about civilization, about the natural order of things, is about to change forever. And at the center of it all sat one human woman, calmly drinking coffee and suggesting they burn down 3,000 years of military tradition. What could possibly go wrong? 3 weeks later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council looked like a completely different gathering. Gone was the atmosphere of defeated resignation. Instead, the chamber buzzed with something that hadn't been felt in over 2 years, hope mixed with absolute bewilderment. Fleet Admiral Zex stood at the tactical display, his scarred face bearing an expression that his subordinates had never seen before. He was smiling. On a Nexarian, this looked roughly like a mechanical harvester having a malfunction, but it was definitely a smile. Operation Ghost Protocol has exceeded all projections, he announced, manipulating the holographic star map. In 17 days, we have eliminated 43 supply depots, 16 communication arrays, and 8 fuel refineries across 12 sectors. The red areas representing Dominion control were now scattered with pulsing yellow markers, each one representing a successful strike. What had once looked like a solid wall of enemy territory now resembled Swiss cheese. Dr. Vasquez sat in her usual spot, working on what appeared to be her 5th cup of coffee of the morning. She'd been officially promoted to Special Strategic Advisor, though nobody was entirely sure what that meant. The humans had a disturbing tendency to make up job titles as they went along. Casualties? Speaker Morvain asked, though his tone suggested he was bracing for bad news. Minimal, Admiral Zex replied, and the word hung in the air like a miracle. 14 operatives lost across all operations. The Dominion losses number in the thousands, plus massive material damage. Councillor Thys leaned forward, her mandibles clicking in what had become her default expression of confusion. How is that possible? Traditional assault doctrine predicts casualty ratios of. Traditional assault doctrine involves flying directly at heavily armed positions while announcing your intentions, Dr. Vasquez interrupted without looking up from her tablet. Turns out enemies have trouble shooting at you when they don't know you're there. Ambassador Rex 9, who had spent the last 3 weeks in a state of perpetual nervous breakdown, raised one of his 4 hands. The intelligence reports mention unusual tactics. Could you elaborate? Dr. Vasquez finally looked up, and her expression suggested she was about to explain something that should have been obvious to a particularly slow child. Team 7 hit the Kepler Station fuel depot by disguising their ship as a garbage scow, she said. They literally flew right past 3 patrol fleets because nobody bothers to scan trash haulers. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. Team 12 destroyed the Vega Prime communication array by bribing a maintenance worker to install a virus in the system during routine updates, she continued. Cost us about 50 credits in local currency. Ambassador Kelton made a sound that might have been laughter or a medical emergency. You corrupted their personnel? We offered a better deal than their current employers, Dr. Vasquez shrugged. Amazing what people will do when they're not being paid enough to care about galactic conquest. Fleet Admiral Zex manipulated the display to show detailed tactical readouts. The most successful operation involved Team 3, who convinced an entire Dominion supply convoy that they were responding to a distress call. The convoy escort actually helped them load the stolen supplies. But that's, Speaker Morvain struggled with the concept. That's lying. It's psychological warfare, Dr. Vasquez corrected. And it worked better than shooting at them would have. The assembled delegates were experiencing a collective crisis of understanding. Everything they'd been taught about warfare, honor, and proper military conduct was being systematically demolished by a species that had apparently learned strategy from watching entertainment programs. There's more, Admiral Zex continued, and his grin became even more unsettling. The Dominion has begun redeploying frontline forces to protect their supply infrastructure. Our intelligence estimates suggest they've pulled back nearly 30% of their assault fleets. Meaning? Ambassador, this prompted. Meaning their offensive operations have stalled, Dr. Vasquez said, finally setting down her coffee. They can't advance if they're too busy guarding their lunch money. The implications hit the chamber like a tidal wave. For the first time in 2 years, the Dominion advance had stopped. Not slowed, not redirected. Stopped. The hegemony leadership is reportedly displeased, Admiral Zex added with what could only be described as malicious satisfaction. Our sources indicate internal disputes about strategic priorities. Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. Nothing destabilizes an authoritarian government like military setbacks they can't explain to their own people. However, Speaker Morvain interjected, his tone carrying the weight of centuries of political experience. We must address the ethical concerns raised by member worlds. The Altarian delegation has formally protested our new tactics as uncivilized. The Altarians? Dr. Vasquez raised an eyebrow. Weren't they the ones begging for evacuation assistance last month when the Dominion was closing in on their system? Well, yes, the speaker admitted. And now they're complaining about the methods we used to save them? They feel that victory achieved through deception lacks honor. Dr. Vasquez stood up slowly, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge that made several delegates unconsciously lean away from her. Honor, she repeated. Let me tell you about honor, Speaker Morvain. My species has been fighting wars for 10,000 years. We've tried honor, we've tried following rules. We've tried being civilized and polite and playing fair. She walked to the tactical display, her movements deliberate and controlled. You know what we learned? Dead heroes don't protect their families. Noble defeats don't save innocent lives. And following rules that your enemy ignores is just a complicated way of committing suicide. The chamber was dead silent. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed muted. The Dominion doesn't care about your honor, Dr. Vasquez continued. They don't care about your traditions, your laws, or your feelings. They care about conquest, and they're very good at it. The only question is whether you want to be honorably enslaved or dishonorably free. Fleet Admiral Zex cleared his throat, his cybernetic implants whirring. There's another development. Our success has attracted attention from previously neutral systems. The Meridian Alliance has requested permission to join the Council. How many worlds? Speaker Morvain asked. 47, the Admiral replied, including 3 major industrial systems and the Nexus trade routes. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Meridian Alliance controlled some of the most strategic territory in the galaxy, and they'd remained stubbornly neutral since the war began. They want to join the winning side, Dr. Vasquez observed. Funny how perception changes when you stop losing every battle. Ambassador Vrex 9 was frantically calculating on his personal computer. If the Alliance joins, our combined fleets would number over 2,000 vessels. They're still outnumbered, but numbers don't matter if you're using them right, Dr. Vasquez finished. Which brings us to Phase 2. Phase 2? Councillor Thesis asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Dr. Vasquez activated her own display, showing a completely different tactical analysis. We've disrupted their supply lines and forced them to redeploy defensively. Now we exploit the chaos. The new star map showed Dominion territory, but with entirely different markers. Instead of supply depots and communication arrays, this version highlighted population centers, government facilities, and industrial complexes. You want to attack civilian targets. Speaker Morvain's voice was barely above a whisper. I want to attack their ability to maintain control, Dr. Vasquez corrected. The Dominion rules through fear and intimidation. But fear only works when people believe you're invincible. She zoomed in on a particular system, highlighting what appeared to be a major population center. This is Dominion Prime 7, administrative capital for their outer territories. Population 12 million. Military presence minimal because they've never needed to defend administrative centers before. "What are you suggesting?" Admiral Zex asked, though his tactical implants were already running calculations. "Liberation," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "We land ground forces eliminate the Dominion garrison and hand the planet back to its original inhabitants." The concept was so audacious, so completely contrary to established warfare doctrine, that several delegates began speaking at once. Ground invasions are impossible without orbital supremacy. The casualties would be enormous. The Dominion would respond with overwhelming force. Would they? Dr. Vasquez asked, and her smile was back. With what? Half their fleet is scattered across the galaxy protecting supply depots that might or might not be targets. The other half is trying to maintain offensive operations on 17 different fronts. She manipulated the display to show fleet positions throughout Dominion space. They're stretched thin, reactive instead of proactive, and their commanders are second-guessing every decision because nothing is working the way it's supposed to. This is exactly when you hit them where they least expect it. Fleet Admiral Zex was nodding slowly, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. Simultaneous operations strike their weakest points while they're distracted by their supply problems. And when the local populations see Dominion forces being defeated, Dr. Vasquez added, they'll start believing that resistance is possible. Nothing spreads faster than hope. Or rebellion, Speaker Morvain observed grimly. Same thing from our perspective. The chamber fell into contemplative silence. What Dr. Vasquez was proposing went beyond unconventional tactics. She was suggesting they fundamentally change the nature of the war itself. "The risks," Councillor Thesis began, "are enormous," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "But so are the potential rewards. Right now we're fighting a war of survival. This could turn it into a war of liberation. And if we fail? Then we fail while fighting back instead of while surrendering," Dr. Vasquez replied. "I'd rather go down swinging than go down begging." Fleet Admiral Zex activated his command console, displaying updated intelligence reports. Our infiltration teams report increasing civil unrest in occupied territories. The supply disruptions have caused shortages of food, medicine, and basic utilities. The Dominion can't maintain control if they can't provide basic services, Dr. Vasquez noted. And they can't provide services if their supply lines keep getting hit. It's a cascade effect, Ambassador Kelton realized. Each successful operation makes the next one easier. "Now you're thinking like a human," Dr. Vasquez said approvingly. Speaker Morvain stood slowly, his ancient frame bearing the weight of a decision that would reshape galactic history. "The Council will vote," he announced. "All in favor of authorizing Phase 2 operations under Strategic Advisor Vasquez's recommendations." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, one by one, hands and appendages began to rise. Fleet Admiral Zex was first, his scarred face grim but determined. Ambassador Kelton followed, all four arms raised in solidarity. Councillor Thess hesitated, then slowly lifted her hand. Within minutes, the vote was unanimous. For the first time in Galactic Council history, they had authorized what amounted to guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale. Dr. Vasquez finished her coffee and stood up. "Well," she said, gathering her materials, "this should be interesting." As she walked toward the exit, Speaker Morvain called after her. "Dr. Vasquez, one final question. What made you so certain this strategy would work?" She paused at the doorway and looked back at the assembled representatives of a dozen species, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "Because we tried everything else first," she said. "And when everything else fails, you do whatever works." 6 months later, the war was over. The Dominion had collapsed not through military defeat, but through the complete breakdown of their ability to govern conquered territories. Rebellions erupted across their empire as local populations realized their oppressors were no longer invincible. The final surrender was signed aboard a human vessel, using tactics that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. And it all started because one human woman raised her hand and asked an inconvenient question. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is interrupt someone who thinks they know everything, especially when they're wrong.